Hello. So testing, 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 testing.
All right, morning, folks. First, I'd like to apologize for this morning. I got caught, unfortunately. I had to do something early in the morning, and traffic was so bad getting back. I didn't get home until after 9. So my apologies about that. But we'll figure out how to make up that time at a later date. So we have 6 so far. So let's give it another couple of minutes and then I'll begin. All right, folks, it's 11:05, so Let's begin. So last time we were about to start hyaline cartilage, but we didn't really have enough time to properly go through it. So now, of course, we should. So let's do that. So first of all, hyaline cartilage is going to be the most common cartilage you're going to find in the body, okay? It is found between bones at joints, and we call it articular cartilage when you find it there. It is found in the vertebra, right? It is found in the rib cage, right? So it is by far the most common type of cartilage you'll find. It's in the nose, it's in the ears, it's all over, right? Now, when you look at hyaline cartilage itself, its structure, it has a gel-like matrix, as we spoke about yesterday, right? So it doesn't flow, but it is sort of springy. Think, um, think more like, when you open a jelly coconut, right? So you open a jelly coconut and the flesh of the coconut is not quite tough, right? But it's still transparent. It's not transparent, but it's white. You know what I'm talking about, right? So the coconut jelly is white, but it's not fully tough yet. You can still press down on it. That's sort of the consistency of your hyaline cartilage, right? So that's a gel-like matrix. And with that gel-like matrix, you also get a fairly smooth matrix. And what makes it smooth is that there are not a lot of fibers in this cartilage. Remember, of course, it is a connective tissue, so there must be some fibers in it. But as you can see here, you're not really seeing a lot of collagen fibers or elastic fibers or anything. What you do see, however, are lacuna. And hopefully everybody remembers what the lacuna are. Lacuna are spaces you'll find in cartilage and bone where the specific cells associated with the cartilage and the bone are to be found. Okay, so obviously this is a lacuna. You can see it here. But if you look carefully, you will see a dark spot right here. And that's the nucleus of a cell. And the cell itself runs this way. Okay, so that's the cell inside the lacuna. So all of these little individual lacunae, I mean that's plural, right, are going to have their own chondrocyte. Also remember, chondro is cartilage. So anytime you say anything with con, C-O-N-D-R on there, it's going to have to do with cartilage, right? So remember now, hyaline cartilage, most common cartilage in the body, very low on fibers. Because of it, it is very smooth. Now, why is it important that it is smooth? Because you're going to find this thing at places like joints and the ends of long bones at the joint in particular, which can potentially rub together while you're moving. It is important that when these two layers of cartilage rub against each other, that they have as little friction as possible. So you leave out as many of the fibers as you can, so that as the cartilage rubs, there's no fiber in there to catch, right? Hopefully that makes sense. Now, elastic cartilage, on the other hand, I mean, it's obviously elastic, which means it's going to have a prominent amount of elastic fibers in it. Now, this one is not super common around the body. It is not going to be as strong as hyaline cartilage because it has virtually no collagen in there. Even though hyaline cartilage doesn't have a lot of collagen in there, it still has enough to give it structural stability. Elastic cartilage, almost none, right? But elastic fibers obviously allow it to stretch quite a bit, right? Now, where do you find this? You're going to find this in the ear, right? So the part of the ear, the pinna is the outer ear. And that now, there's a reason why you can pull on your earlobe, for example, and it snaps back into position because your earlobe is made up of elastic cartilage, okay? Now, it is also the reason why if you put earrings in your ears that are a little on the big side, over time, it pulls your earlobe, right? And you must have seen people with these elongated earlobes because they wear these heavy earrings. The elastic cartilage is not very structural. You can't really take that kind of pressure. If you want to put in a big earring, stick it in the other part of the ear, right? The upper part of the ear, that's hyaline cartilage. So that can take the pressure, right? Now, you also find elastic cartilage in the epiglottis. Remember what the epiglottis is. The epiglottis is the covering of the glottis. The glottis is the space in the larynx. Okay? So fundamentally, the epiglottis covers up the larynx so that nothing can, well, no food or drink can get down into it. And being able to stretch means you can pull it over the larynx and secure it properly. It's kind of like one of those, these silicone covers for like pots that you pull over the pot into place, if you know what I'm talking about. That's basically what the elastic cartilage is like. You can stretch it over something, right? Now, when you look at the elastic cartilage here, you can also see we have chondrocytes, which means we also have lacuna, right? So there's my chondrocyte again. And here's the nucleus here, right? Now, if you look, you see a lot of the black streaks. Well, they're not, well, they don't really look black, they look sort of bluish, but you can see them here. Those are the elastic fibers, right? And they're all over the thing. So there's a bounty of elastic fibers in your elastic cartilage. Now, remember, the elastic fibers, good for stretching, not good for structural, okay? They're not load bearing, if you want to put it that way, right? Now, when you have a membrane surrounding cartilage, I want you to note the name of it because I have an example here. The membrane around the cartilage is called a perichondrium. Now, of course, peri means around, and as we already know, chondr is referring to cartilage, so perichondrium means around the cartilage, okay? Now we have fibrocartilage. It is the toughest cartilage in the body. It is quote-unquote load-bearing, right? It is going to have the most collagen fibers in there of any of the cartilages, right? Heavily inundated with collagen fibers. Collagen fibers are by far the strongest fibers that you'll find in cartilage, okay? So obviously your fiber cartilage must be found in areas where there's a fair amount of weight being placed upon them. So you'll find them in intervertebral discs. You'll find them in the knee joints as well, right? And of course, they're there to absorb shock. So as you're running, you're putting the weight of your body down on your knee joint. So it's important to have fiber cartilaginous pads that can absorb that impact of that weight slamming into the knee. Also, the vertebral column, once again, the weight of the upper body sits on the vertebral column. So you're going to need to have cartilage that is fairly robust, right? You also have hyaline cartilage in an intervertebral disc as well, right? Don't get me wrong. But the fibrocartilage doesn't compress very much, right? Whereas the hyaline cartilage is a little bit more compressible. You have, I mean, you think about what is running through your vertebra, your spinal cord, right? And your spinal cord is so soft. It's like hardened jello. The last thing you want to happen is, as a person, as you are moving, is that the spinal cord becomes deformed. You don't want any pressure to be placed on the spinal cord. So by having fiber cartilage there, that doesn't deform very much. It keeps your vertebra from twisting in the wrong way and potentially squashing and damaging your spinal cord, okay? So it is there to prevent over movement because it doesn't compress too much. That said, of course, some people are born with very flexible spines. This is due to their ligaments being too stretchy. Remember, ligaments join bones to bone, right? So you should have ligaments that are joining your vertebrae together. And if they're very stretchy, you will find people being able to bend over backwards and touch their heels and stuff like that, right? Which is a cool part of it, don't get me wrong. But what you probably don't know is that these people are actually putting stress on their spine. And there have been multiple accidents with these kind of people that have ended up paralyzing themselves because of this bending over backwards business. There's a reason why we have a phrase, you want me to bend over backwards to help you. What does bend over backwards mean? It means going way outside of what is comfortable and put yourself into peril to help somebody else. That's what it means, right? So yeah, fiber cartilage absorbs impact, doesn't flex out a massive amount because you don't want your spine to be compressed or twisted, the spinal cord, because you can damage it, right? So when you look at your fiber cartilage here, it's a little difficult to see here, but these are the lacuna, right? There's red, so let me change the color of this thing here. So these are the lacunae here. And remember, each one of these is going to have a chondrocyte in it. I want you to notice, however, that the lacunae, for the most part, are arranged in what looks like rows, right? So they're more organized than the lacunae you'd find in elastic cartilage and in hyaline cartilage. Elastic and hyaline cartilage, the lacuna are sort of scattered randomly. But in fiber cartilage, it's much more organized, as you can see here, right? Hopefully you can see this. Now, this is somebody actually drew a sample, and you can see here running in between these rows of chondrocytes, we're going to have our elastic, our collagen fibers, right? And of course, there's a lot of them. So that gives this thing all the strength that is required to stop you from breaking your spinal column, right? Okay, so that's it for cartilage. So just to recap what we did for the cartilage, identify the type of cartilage, we identify the physical characteristics that make up the cartilage, we indicate the main function of the cartilage, right? Once you can do that, you're good to go, right? Now, muscle. I think this is the last of the tissues you'll be looking at. We have the nervous tissue too. Muscle, as I'm sure you know, there are 3 types. Okay, you should know this from CSEC. The most common type of muscle is going to be skeletal muscle, at least common by mass. Okay, and you should also remember that we call skeletal muscle skeletal because it is attached to your skeleton. You also should know skeletal muscle as voluntary muscle. As voluntary muscle, right? Because this is the muscle that you control. You can choose to move this muscle. And the other 2 down here would be involuntary muscle. Right? Because of course, you do not have direct control over these muscles. Cardiac muscle, of course, is only found in the heart, as I'm sure you know. And smooth muscle is mostly found around tubes in your body. Tubes, of course, we're talking about your blood vessels. Those are tubes. So you'll find smooth muscle as circular muscle layers and longitudinal muscle layers in your arteries and veins, more artery than vein. You also find them running along the alimentary canals, more tubes, also as circular and longitudinal muscle layers, right? Now, that said, here is the basic structure. Once again, this is something you should have done at CSEC, right? So we should be on the same page where this is concerned. So first of all, your skeletal muscle cells are the largest of the muscle cells. All right? And when I say large, it's like, I mean, it can be one cell can be multiple centimeters long, which doesn't sound like a lot, a couple centimeters, but for a cell, as in one continuous cell, that is a lot. Okay, we're talking about most cells are smaller than 200 micrometers. So to have a cell that is 2 centimeters long is quite a bit. So normally, because of that, when you see them under the microscope, you're only seeing sections of them. Okay, so this is just a section of your skeletal muscle. Now, here's a couple of things I want you to notice. First of all, I want you to notice that these cells are somewhat rectangular in their cross section, sorry, their longitudinal section. So this is a Ellis, longitudinal section. So you can see here that they look sort of rectangular in section. They have multiple nuclei, not just one. Because if you have a cell that's a couple centimeters long, you're going to need several nuclei to help manage what's going on in the cell. So this is a nucleus here, right? And you also should see these striations. I mean, they're so obvious, right? Running through your skeletal muscle. These striations are associated with the contractility of the muscle. They allow the muscle to contract, right? We refer to them as Z discs, but we won't get into that yet. That's our next semester. So skeletal muscles, largest of the muscle cells, they tend to be rectangular in longitudinal section. They tend to have multiple nuclei, right? They tend to have striations in them, which are those lines. And the last thing I'll say is that the nucleus tends to be pressed up against the cell membrane, which is why when you look here, most of the nuclei seem to be pressed up on the side, right? So they tend to be pressed up onto the cell membrane. Now, once again, this is voluntary muscle. This is muscle that moves your skeleton under your control, okay? Now, the next one is cardiac muscle. Obviously, cardiac muscle is heart muscle, right? Cardiac muscle is once again only going to be found, of course, in the heart. Now, it's a little difficult to see one cardiac muscle cell here. So let me outline one so you can see it. As you can see, it's a little bit more complicated, right? Those green spots there are the nuclei. All right. So that there is a cardiac muscle cell. It is shorter than your skeletal muscle because I mean everybody is. That said, it is striated just like your skeletal muscles. And it has a tendency to be bifurcated. It has a tendency to split. So you can see a split right here. Okay. And also, it has a tendency to have two or more nuclei, usually two. Right? Right? So let me just outline the nuclei once again in black so you can see where they are. It also has a structure called an intercalated disc that you'll find at the end of the cells. So, for example, here's one. It's a little hard to see them. And here's another one over here. Okay. These intercalated discs are very important because they allow you to send a signal from one muscle cell, and then that one muscle cell can send that signal to the muscle cells that they share an intercalated disc with. So it means you can quickly send signals through your cardiac muscle to coordinate things like the contraction of the ventricles, for example, right? So once the ventricle starts to contract and you send a signal of a contraction, that signal of a contraction quickly spreads to all the heart muscle. And the heart muscle is called myo. And myo, by the way, just means muscle. Cardium. And of cardium, of course, is talking about the heart. So muscle heart. So myocardium is literally heart muscle, right? So which of course means it is made up of cardiac muscle cells. So remember now, they are shorter than your skeletal muscle cells. The cells themselves can be bifurcated, as in they're split in two at one end. They tend to have one or two nuclei. They are striated. They have intercalated discs, which allow them to pass signals between cells easily, right? To coordinate contraction. Now, it's a little hard to make them out from this, so we won't bother with this one, right? Now, smooth muscle now. First of all, smooth muscle cells, as it says here, are spindle-shaped cells. These days, nobody knows what a spindle is, okay? It used to be used back in the day when people were making thread. It would help to spin yarn into thread, which, of course, nobody does by hand these days, right? So let me show you what a spindle shape looks like, so you have some idea. A spindle is supposed to taper towards the end and be thickest in the middle. So that there is a smooth muscle cell, right? Now that smooth muscle cell does not have to be so thick. They can be very elongate. So if you look here, Let me outline one of these real quick. In the middle, of course, we have the nucleus. So that there is our smooth muscle cell, okay? Now, they are the smallest of the three types of cells. We mentioned the spindle shape already, which means they taper at both ends. And when you look in them, you notice that there are no striations, there are no lines anywhere, like we had in cardiac muscle and skeletal muscle. So they are non-striated. We also mentioned, of course, you find them in the walls of your organs, tracts, arteries, veins, basically any kind of tube in your body, you're going to find these skeletal muscles. Smooth muscles, sorry, right? Now, membranes, I think this is the last bit here before we move on to the cardiovascular system. You have multiple mucous membranes in your body, okay? Mucous membranes are normally associated with some part of your body that has to be maintained at a fairly moist, has to be kept moist, but might be potentially exposed to the environment, okay? So you're going to find mucous membranes, once again, in places in your body that you have to keep it moist to keep cells alive. That's why you normally need the moisture. But you can expose those cells potentially to the environment, which means that there's a risk of infection. Pathogens can come in, right? So as it says here, mucous membranes are epithelial membranes that consist of a mucus-forming epithelium that is attached to an underlying areolar connective tissue. So mucous membranes on top, simple, well, they're epithelial tissue. Below, you have areolar connective tissue. All right, then it says these membranes line the body cavities that open to the outside, as we were saying earlier. The entire digestive tract is lined with mucous membranes. Other examples include the respiratory, excretory, and reproductive tracts. So your nasal cavity, for example, is lined with mucous membrane. Now, obviously, mucous membranes going to have cells that produce mucus. Now, let me ask my first question of the day. Can anyone tell me what sort of tissue this is? Can anyone tell me what sort of tissue this is?
Pseudostratified columnar.
Pseudostratified columnar is correct. Thank you. Very nice. So we can see here multiple nuclei, right? And they're all over the place. They don't seem to be forming at any consistent height. They're just scattered all about. And what we're not seeing are individual cells very clearly to show where they're coming from. And we can see on top, we have a little fuzz going on up here, that's cilia. So this is pseudo-stratified ciliated columnar. Because remember, pseudostratified cells are columnar, right? So pseudostratified ciliated columnar. And I had mentioned to you all last time that in columnar tissue, you will sometimes find goblet cells, right? Something like this. The nucleus down here. And the purpose of the goblet cell is to produce mucus. And the mucus, of course, is released onto the surface. So in the case of the ciliated columnar, you will occasionally find a goblet cell, like that one there, right? And these will release mucus onto the surface, and that mucus will be spread by the cilia, and the mucus is there to trap pathogens, to trap dust particles, any sort of thing that, remember, these tissues are being exposed to the atmosphere, right? So it traps things that you don't want to get into your body. It also keeps the surface as moist as possible, because once again, they're exposed directly to the external environment. They can dry out, okay? Now, when an infectious agent infects epithelial tissues, the goblet cells tend to go into overdrive and produce a lot of mucus. So this, for example, is one of the reasons why your nose runs when you have a cold, because the rhinovirus, which is the cold virus, of course, is irritating essentially your pseudocyte ciliated layer by infecting the cells, and then you get this massive production of mucus as a way of trying to essentially wipe away or wash the virus out of your nasal cavity, okay? So that's why your nose tends to leak when you have a cold, because of our goblet cells in our mucous membrane. Now, if you've ever been to any place that has extremely dry air, right? For example, I know some people have who spend a lot of time in air-conditioned spaces will get nosebleeds. I don't know if any of you have that issue. But generally speaking, a good air conditioner is also a dehumidifier, right? Why does it dehumidify? Because it's easier to cool dry air than it is to cool very moist air. So by pulling water out of the air, it's easier for the AC to cool the room. All right, one person said, like, Gabriel says she gets nosebleeds when it's extremely hot. When it is extremely hot, it also tends to be extremely dry, right? So just like in an AC room, it's about the dryness. What happens is that as you're breathing in this very, very dry air, it essentially dehydrates the mucous membranes of your nasal cavities, right? And it causes them to crack open. So you start to get breaks in the tissue. And below the tissue, you have areolar connective tissue, which has capillaries running through it. And those capillaries don't get exposed to the dry air because of the damage to your mucous membrane. And they start to dry out, and then they break open, and then all of a sudden you start to get a nosebleed. Okay? So very, very dry air, breathing it in over a long time, if you're at all susceptible, you might end up with a nosebleed because of damage being done by the dryness of the air, right? Okay. But remember, without the mucous membranes there, then just regular moist air would still be dry enough to cause these problems. So the mucous membrane is doing something. It's just that it can't overcome extreme dry air, okay? Now, serous membranes are membranes that are going to line your body cavities. If we'd already spoken about some serous membranes lining your abdominal pelvic cavity, which is the peritoneal membrane, or lining your thoracic cavity, which is your pleural membrane, right? Now, even around the heart, you have a pericardial membrane. So it says serous membranes line the body's cavities that do not open directly to the outside. So you have mucous membranes lining the places, the cavities that open to the outside, and serous membranes lining the places that do not open to the outside, right? It also mentions that serous membranes are covered by a single layer of squamous cells. Remember, squamous, flat. And if it's one layer of them, well, you tell me, one layer of squamous cells, How would I describe that? Jordan, what would you call the proper way of saying it? One layer of squamous cells is called what?
Sir, simple,
Yes.
simple squamous. Wait.
Exactly. So when you have one single layer, it is simple, right? So, one single layer of squamous cells is simple squamous epithelium. You're 100% correct. Thank you very much. Now, it also mentions here that because these layers are very thin, they can secrete a fluid called serous fluid, right? So they're taking fluid from underlying tissues, and this fluid is passing through them. And the serous fluid is going to help to lubricate the epithelium. Now, why do you need lubrication in membranes? Because the membranes tend to be found as double-sided membranes, okay? By that I mean, let us say, for example, let's say, for example, I have a lung here, all right? Almost looks like a kidney, but we'll pretend it's a lung. Let's say I have my lung here. Remember, the lung sits in the thoracic cavity, right? The thoracic cavity is going to have lining it or serous membrane. But the serous membrane itself sort of folds over on itself to form a double membrane. And the next part of the double membrane sits right on top of the organ, right? So it's in direct contact with it. So remember, we're just folding our serous membrane to get two parts. The part that is touching the cavity is going to be the parietal part. I'm missing an eye there. And the part that touches the organ is the visceral part, right? Now, in between them, you have a little space sometimes. And the space itself is where you're going to put the serous fluid, right? So in this little space here, you're going to have fluid. And this fluid allows for very good lubrication. As the lungs are inflating and deflating, these two membranes are going to rub against one another, right? Because of the change in the shape of the lungs. So as the lung inflates, deflates, these membranes rub against each other. Now, if there was no fluid in here, and we normally call this fluid pleural fluid, now remember, this is pleural fluid because it's in the pleural cavity, right? But in general, you can just call it serous fluid. So specifically, this is pleural fluid, but generally speaking, you can call it serous fluid because they're coming from serous membranes, right? So because of the slickness, let's call it, of the pleural fluid, as the membranes rub, they slide over each other, and therefore they do not do each other any damage. Okay, the membranes are important because the membranes have a protective function, right? So you want them there, but you don't want them damaging each other. Hence, the pleural fluid is necessary for this to occur, right? So when it says here, no, yeah, thin layer of serous fluid that's secreted by the epithelium, and the serous fluid lubricates the membrane and reduces friction and abrasion when the organs in the thoracic, which of course we're talking about lungs here, or abdominal pelvic cavity move against each other or the cavity walls, right? It also mentions that serous membranes have a special name given according to their location. So for example, serous membranes that line the thoracic cavity and cover the lungs, of course, as we just did, are called pleura, okay? Whereas if they're in the abdominal pelvic cavity, they are peritonia, right? All right. All right, let's start the other one. I know we don't have a lot of time left. Let's do it in like 4 minutes or so to start this. Okay, so this one here is already on I don't use Blackboard. Ignore the Blackboard link. I don't use Blackboard anymore. So cardiovascular system. You should already know your cardiovascular system is made up of 3 basic parts. Okay. Our cardiovascular system, you need 3 parts. You need a pump of some sort, which of course in this case is going to be a heart. You're going to need transport tubes, which of course are going to be your blood vessels. And you need a transport fluid, in which this case is going, of course, to be blood, right? So all cardiovascular systems are going to require those components. Now, we already know that we have a heart, and you already know how many chambers are in that heart, right? I mean, you all know there are 2 atria, 2 ventricles, one on the left side, one on the right side. You already know that blood itself is composed of multiple parts, because we know blood is a connective tissue. It's a fluid connective tissue. And therefore, blood must therefore have, once again, cells, matrix, and fibers. You should already know where the cells are, because obviously they're erythrocytes, leukocytes, and I mentioned platelets are cell fragments, but we still take them. So those are your cellular components. And your plasma is going to be your matrix, which will contain, of course, your ground substance, which is a liquid part of the matrix, as well as the fibers in it, which of course are fibrinogen. So all of this stuff you know already, right? That said, what's the purpose of blood? Once again, you know these things from CSEC. You know blood's main function is transport, okay? It transports, for example, dissolved gases. So we're talking about, for our purposes, oxygen and carbon dioxide, okay? We don't really count the nitrogen gas, really. It's there, but it's not something that is biologically relevant. You have lots of nitrogen gas dissolved in your blood, but since your body doesn't really use it for anything, we kind of just ignore it, right? So only an issue if you're a diver or on a certain metabolic condition, but we won't get into that right now. Now, it also transports nutrients. And of course, by nutrients, we're talking about things like glucose, which is the amino acids, and lipoproteins are how we transport lipids. We'll get to that later. You also transport hormones. So for example, insulin is found in the blood. You also have HGH, human growth hormone, which is also found in the blood, right? And of course, our metabolic wastes. The first thing that should come to your mind, of course, is urea, because it is the most important one. But you also have things like bilirubin, right? Or even ammonia to a very small amount, are all metabolic wastes. that can be transported in your blood, right? It mentions here that you also allow for the regulation of pH. The idea here is very simple. If your body becomes acidic because of some metabolic issue, your blood can collect up these extra protons. Remember, protons make things acidic, and it can carry them to the kidneys and dump them, okay? If your blood is too basic, it can go to the kidneys and collect protons to make it more acidic. So your blood can therefore help to balance the pH of your body, as well as balance the pH of itself, right? By taking away ions or carrying ions too, right? And remember, the kidneys are going to be extremely important with regards to this, right? Kidneys and lungs. All right, last slide. Yeah, last slide for today. Now, it mentions also that another function of the blood is to restrict fluid loss, right? So when you get a cut and you start to bleed, one of the blood's functions is to stop that bleeding from occurring. It also mentions defense against toxins and pathogens. So of course, our white blood cells are going to be getting into that, right? Which we'll talk about later, Friday. Or is it Thursday? One of them, Thursday. Now, the last thing I want to mention here is stabilization of body temperature. All parts of your body are not generating the same amount of heat. Your skeletal muscles and your liver produce more heat than any other organs in your body. When the blood passes through your skeletal muscles and your liver, it warms up. And then it takes this warm blood and brings it to other internal organs to keep them warm as well, right? So your body generates heat in these two major places and then distributes that heat via the blood, okay? Skeletal muscles, liver, then the blood takes it from there and spreads the heat around. Okay. The slide's probably going to take more than the 5 minutes we have left, so let's forget it. So we'll do this one on Thursday. I think we have a Thursday, 7 o'clock, something like that. No, it's 5 o'clock, isn't it? Yeah, Thursday at 5. All right, so we will meet again on Thursday for this. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, genetics. But barring anything happening again, I can't imagine it should, but it shouldn't. I will see you all, well, speak to you all at 8 a.m., right? Something happened to yesterday's session. I haven't had a chance to check my email yet, so I'm opening it as we speak. All right, okay. I'll try and get that sorted for you. All right, folks. Otherwise, we will speak again. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, sir. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, where do you post the recordings for the class? On the Canvas?
Canvas does not allow recordings of any significant size. But you can check my I'm going to give you a link to a YouTube channel I have. You'll find some of the content there.
Okay, sir.
But that's for Thursday.
Okay, sir. Thanks.
No problem. All right, folks.